Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary with a knife video. Got a blade today that is kind of an interesting one, right up my alley and probably very appealing to a number of you. This is the Benchmade 757 Vicars. It is a Shane Seibert design or Seibert design. In all of his knives, he's done a few for Benchmade. There's a couple of fixed blades. The 575 Adamas, the 275 Adamas, the MPR, the Mini Pocket Rocket, this one, and I may be forgetting another folder. I think that's all the folders though. But anyway, all of his knives have in common the fact that they're fairly robust, overbuilt, heavy-duty knives. Generally speaking, the MPR would maybe be a bit of an exception here, but I'm not a huge fan of it anyway. But generally speaking, they're designed for combat or harder, heavier uses. You're going to see a thicker blade, a heavier, thicker handle, and you'll get benefits from those things, but then there'll be detractions as well. The styling on this one we'll speak to a little more when we go through the details, but it is a fairly Seibert-esque design. It kind of has that look and feel to it that you would expect from him. For me, it was a knife that was appealing off the bat, and then once some details started to come out about it, I sort of skipped it. Number one, this is fairly expensive. Now that's because it's titanium liners, not stainless steel. Okay, so that's a difference. Also, when I've heard some rumors that these had an issue with some up and down blade play. Okay, now this particular one is great. But because of those rumors, I held off on picking one of these up until this one was offered in a trade. And so since the person on the other end of the trade had it in hand, I could ask some questions about blade play and lockup and that kind of stuff. And so I would say that if you're interested in this, it's a great knife, very, very good performance. But if you're interested in one, do the same thing. If you're going to get it from a retailer, if you can go in and try the blade out for yourself. This does have that adjustable lock. Okay, so one of the things that I didn't get to ask or I haven't been able to follow up on is, okay, if you've got one of the ones with blade play, have you tried adjusting that stop pin to change the lock interface, and does that make a difference? Okay, I haven't been able to ask that question. All I did was get one that didn't have those issues in the first place. So be aware of that. But otherwise, right, this is a blade that would be right up my alley. Big knife, overbuilt, very big and comfortable in hand, really, really robust blade. So a lot of good things about this knife. So having said all that by way of introduction, let's get into some of the details, starting with size and weight. So overall, this knife is 8 7/8 inches. The blade is 3 7/8 and the handle is 5 inches. Okay, now it is a fairly thick handle. Kind of puts me in mind of a Browse because they're always very thick handles. But this guy is 5/8 of an inch thick, and that does not count the pocket clip. Of course, that's outside your pocket anyway. It is very, very hand filling. Okay, exceptionally so. And it weighs in at 6.6 ounces. Now 6.6 ounces is pretty hefty, but when you look at just the sheer amount of steel in this blade, it's a very thick blade stock. The amount of G10, there are 2 layers of G10 plus titanium here. It is a backspacer rather than open pillar, and there's no milling in the titanium. So all of those little things add weight, okay? And so that you can expect this to be a fairly hefty little knife, or fairly hefty large knife. That said, 6.6 ounces for me is not unreasonable. As I've said before, I carry the ZT-0200 from time to time. In fact, fairly frequently. This is a favorite of mine, and it is heavier than that at over 7 ounces. So that's the size and weight. In terms of how this carries, it's a pretty hefty knife to carry. I'm wearing a pair of shorts today. They're sort of khaki shorts, and it's quite comfortable in those. But of course, if you put on a pair of dress pants or a really light pair like jogging shorts or something, it would be totally not feasible, right? So it is pretty heavy duty, and it's designed to be pretty heavy duty. All right, now let's go ahead and zoom in to the blade, and we'll start to looking at some of the details before we get to some of the other comparisons I have here. And I've got a few of these sort of overbuilt, hard use, heavy duty folders to share with you by way of comparison. Most are in a similar, well, no, I've got a couple in a similar price range, and then a few are a little cheaper. So maybe that would be something appealing to some of you out there. All right, so there we go. there's that blade. Let me go over the details. This is a really, really cool blade. Number one, very nice stonewash finish. That is not what we're used to seeing from Benchmade. Benchmade sort of does this stonewash finish, or stonewash satin hybrid most of the time. This blade, not so. This is definitely a stonewash finish. Now, as you look at the blade, you can see probably pretty evidently that this is sort of a modified tanto shaped blade. So if you just finish this line and this line, you would have a tanto. What they've done is just kind of curved that grind around a little bit and modified that. And it does make the knife a little more versatile, all right? Now, I think tanto blades are very handy for a lot of utility tasks, and this one doesn't lose much of that. In fact, I have done quite a bit of cutting just with this portion, purposely to compare to a typical tanto where you can use that secondary tip for things, and it actually works pretty well. Now, in addition, you've got this top swedge, which does narrow it out toward the tip, but it's still really thick, guys. Look at the amount of steel you have out there. Super, super thick blade stock. I don't recommend prying with any knife, but this would be one of those knives that you could probably get away with at least some light prying. I wouldn't do it, but if you really needed to, okay, and you wanted a blade that you say, okay, you know, I'm not going to do that regularly, but if I really ever needed to, I want to know I can, this would be a great option. The other great thing about this blade is they started this swedge here, which is really important if you're like me and you like to choke up from time to time. So you've got a full thickness, full width here on the blade that allows you for a place to put your thumb, and I really, really like that. I don't always grip it this way, but you know, if you're doing a fine detailed cutting task, this is a really nice option. And a lot of knives take this swedge all the way back and sort of take that option away from you. So one last thing about this blade, it is a flat ground blade. You've got this very attractive fuller here, which is fairly Siebert-esque or Seibert-esque. Now, let me say one really cool thing about the edge geometry. This is a thick, heavy-duty blade, no question. However, it is a blade that still cuts well. It's fairly thin, or thin enough, let's say, behind the edge. So let's say if you compare this to a Lion Steel or a Strider or even a Hinderer, it's much thinner behind the edge than those are, and it just expands out pretty quickly. So it comes to a full thickness fairly quickly, but because it has that thin edge geometry, it performs better than a lot of others. In fact, as a direct comparison, I don't have my 275 Adamas anymore, but this cuts considerably better than the Adamas did. It's S30V steel, so very good, corrosion resistant, edge retaining steel, no issue at all there. Very, very impressive. Now, let's keep going and talk about lockup and deployment. Let me just show you that one more time. This knife feels like it should be on bearings. It is smooth as silk. See if I can get that to fall and keep it in focus. So there you go, very, very smooth knife. Now the detent could be a little stronger, but it's strong enough that it still allows you to flip the blade out. And the blade's pretty heavy, so it does a lot of that work for you. Now if you're in an area where gravity knives can be an issue, just be careful with it. Maybe tighten up that pivot a little bit or something to help with that somewhat. Now, very, very smooth, extremely impressive for a knife that's not on bearings at all. So really, really good that way. Now, this is, rather than a stainless steel frame lock, it's a titanium frame lock. That's one of the things that adds to the price. Frankly, I appreciate it. It just makes the knife a little more high-end and a little more rust resistant. I do like the titanium frame lock. One complaint I do have, as I've often pointed out, this is a big, heavy-duty, overbuilt knife, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know, this titanium is thick enough that it's going to work well, but you don't really need this relief cut, and yet there it is. I think I would have passed on the relief cut and added a little more strength to that. Now, I will say this. Compared to a frame lock, you are getting the benefit of the stability that comes from this G10. So when you put that liner against the G10, it is going to add a little bit of strength and a little bit of stability to that. So lockup and deployment, very, very good. The thumb studs on this, by the way, are really comfortable. They're not ridged in any way. They're just kind of there. They're smooth, and they do function exceptionally well. So there you go. You can see again how smooth that knife is. And that's a comment that I've heard many people make, is this knife is smooth as silk, feels like it's on bearings even though it isn't. What about the handle? I'll have to zoom out just a little bit. There you go. So you can now get the whole knife in frame. This handle is pretty cool. So back to, we talked about the lock already, but it is titanium framed, or I mean titanium liners with a double layer of G10. And that double layer of G10 serves a similar role to sort of proud liners, where it just adds some 3D contouring to the handle and makes it more comfortable. It's extremely grippy G10, really, when you grab this knife, it definitely grabs you back. And the jimping, although it still does the typical Benchmade stuff and is lower than the handle scales here, it still grips really well. Now the back, of course, is even more so than the front, and even the jimping in here, all of that jimping actually works, which if you've seen other Benchmade reviews from me, you know that I've often complained about the fact that they consistently put the jimping below the scales. The difference is the space here is much wider, so your thumb can really get in and dig into those titanium liners and get a really firm grip on this knife. So very positive grip. And because of the thickness and the contouring, this is comfortable in pretty well any grip you could think of, even in that choked up grip I was showing you before, and that's achieved by leaving a little of the blade at the full thickness here at the top, which I really do appreciate. All right, so ergonomics are very good, maybe even excellent on this. Now the one complaint that some people may have, not me because I'm right-handed, but single position clip, so you're not switching this around. Many lefties, by the way, will tell you, look, if you're going to do a liner lock and it's going to be configured for right-hand carry, it's not really well set up for a lefty anyway, so maybe it's not that big of a deal. But I find it works really well. It is very grippy G10, so this is a bit of a pocket shredder. Not the worst, maybe not as bad as cold steel, but it will tear up your pockets a little bit. If you carry this every day, you would see some substantial pocket wear starting to occur. There is backspacer there, G10 as well, with some jimping on it. Again, a backspacer is fine, but it is going to make anything that any knife with a backspacer instead of standoffs is going to be a little bit heavier. Finally, lanyard hole is plenty big enough for paracord. So there you go. That's the handle. Again, there hasn't been much that I've really disliked about this, other than the D10 could be a little stronger. Relief cut on the titanium liner. I'm not a huge fan of relief cuts done that way. Otherwise, though, I'm really very impressed with this knife. Let's pull out some comparisons as we kind of close things off. So in terms of size and also competitive options, this is a good knife for me because I have a lot of this style of knife. So let's start off with the Spyderco Manix 2 XL. The Manix was sort of Spyderco's answer to the hard use knife trend. Let's make something overbuilt and beefy and super strong, okay? So that's the Manix. The Manix is just a teeny bit bigger, so if you're familiar with that. Now in terms of actual cutting edge, there you go, the Adamas has more cutting edge. Another similar knife, and these are both similar in price point, they're similar in size and weight, and even in function. I'll probably do a comparison between these two. This, of course, is the Zero Tolerance 0560. This, of course, being the Benchmade. Very similar in many ways. It would be a tough call. The ergos on this one are just a little better, but I think these would be two very close competitors. Similar design philosophy in terms of being, overbuilt, tough knives, good for combat or even some outdoor use. Although I will say a more traditional drop point with a belly is probably more versatile than this modified Tanto. Here's another overbuilt liner lock, okay, and even the sides of the liners are similar. The Benchmade is a little thicker. Again, I think these would make a great comparison, and someone looking at one or the other would probably want to, if you're looking at this, you probably want to consider this and vice versa. Again, there's a bit of a price discrepancy here, but very good competitive options. Now, of course, the ZTs do have actual 3D machining rather than just the configuration of the handle. Finally, the good old Cold Steel Recon 1. And if you're, I'll be honest guys, any really hard use knife that you're looking at, the Recon 1 is a pretty standard blade. Now, the Benchmade is going to be a much more robust blade. It's going to be tougher, prying, all that kind of stuff is going to be better with this. But like I said before, I don't advocate prying with a knife. And so to me, these are more comparable. Again, very, very ergonomic, very grippy G10 on both of these. And you know, I feel like every one of the knives I pulled out here would make a good comparison video. Let me know which ones you'd be most interested in. So overall, I'm actually really impressed with this knife. I like Siebert's designs. He does pull off, you know, hard use, aggressive, sort of tactical looking blades in a way that's generally pretty functional. He doesn't give a lot of concern about weight, okay? That's just the way it is. That's not his thing. He doesn't go to take a lot of steps, and Benchmade maybe is kind of part and parcel to all of that. But if you're looking for a high-end knife that's very capable, that can be hard use and very tough and durable, but also versatile enough to be sort of your EDC blade, this is a good option. A little expensive, and they probably could have cut some of that cost by using stainless steel instead of titanium, but frankly, I think the knife would lose something if they did that. So that's my take on the Benchmade 757 Vicar. Really cool knife. I really enjoy carrying this one, using it. It's really photogenic, so if you follow me on Instagram, you've seen it a bunch of times. That's my take, and we will talk to you soon.